It's Nick Kemp here with episode 41 of the Ikigai Podcast, and Ken Mogi, neuroscientist and international best-selling author, returns to talk about his new book, The Way of Nagomi, which I have a copy here and I can recommend. Great to have you back today, Ken. Thanks so much for your time.
Hi, Nick. It's always such a pleasure it's my Ikigai to talk to you. Thank you, Nick.
Well, thank you. That means so much to me. So, yeah, we had you on episode 6 and 13, and we talked about Ikigai and Kodawari, and I really enjoyed those conversations. So I'm very excited to have you back to talk about your new book, The Way of Nagomi, How to Live a Balanced and Harmonious Life the Japanese Way. And I must admit, Ken, I was unfamiliar with this word. Mm-hmm. And it actually seems like a concept even more multifaceted and ambiguous than Ikigai. Mm-hmm. You describe it as a blend of balance of different factors and liken it to Japan's approach to cultural assimilation of seeking harmony between indigenous and imported elements. Why did you choose Nagomi as the subject of your latest book?
I know it's kind of a difficult word to understand at the beginning, but I do believe that Nagomi is actually what, for example, love is to many people. And when you think about life, there are many values like money, social status, work, and so on. But many people would agree that love is one of the most important things, from which all your pleasures and motivations would arise. Nagomi is something like that. Nagomi is a really important concept, the important concept in Japanese history, culture, and so on. So all these wonderful ideas coming from Japan, for example, Ikigai, or ichigo ichie, or kintsugi, or gaman, or kodawari, or all these things. These things actually can be considered as coming from this simple one idea, Nagomi. So Nagomi is that important. It is in the first constitution of Japan.
Oh, wow.
And in the 73rd article constitution back in 800s. I don't recall. I'm not really great with historical numbers. And it is the name of the train that the emperor rides on. It's a specially designed, really, wonderful train. And the name is Nagomi. So Nagomi is actually many things, and it's harmony, balance, and so on. And I think it's really important to understand this concept if you are interested in Japanese philosophy of life and culture.
Yeah, obviously from reading your book, I'm sort of beginning to understand the breadth and depth of the concept. And I've learned, obviously, with these Japanese words, I understand that trying to define them in one sentence really is basically impossible. So I think having these conversations with you and other Japanese gives great insight to these cultural concepts. But I'm going to now contradict myself and say a basic definition is this feeling of calmness and relaxation. And the kanji used to represent the word is wa, which generally means harmony and peace.
Yeah.
And I reflected on this and realized that wa is perhaps one of Japan's most important cultural values. It's in the name of the current imperial era, so Reiwa, and that again has these multiple meanings of order and peace or auspicious harmony or joyful harmony. And then there are words like heiwa, which I guess again is peace, and choa, which might be internal peace or interrelationship peace. So wa seems to be very important to Japanese culture. Why are wa and harmony such important cultural traits in Japan, do you think?
I think it's all about sustainability because, Japan is a country really committed to build a sustainable culture. As you recall, the present emperor is the 125th or 6th in succession. It's the longest running hereditary monarchy. So that's one sustainability, and also Japan is great in making the forests sustainable, like this wonderful artificial forest at the heart of Tokyo, Meiji Jingu Shrine. I mean, this forest is really wonderful. I mean, it was built after the Meiji Emperor passed away about 100 years ago, and so it's there, and it was artificially designed, and it's now a thriving primordial forest even. So, and as you might know, as you well know, Japan is a country not so much in love with ideologies. I mean, there are societies where the ideology of free market, for example, libertarianism or communism or socialism or so on, in some countries, these ideologies are important. But Japan is a country where its peoples would try to strike a balance, harmony in a practical way. Not so much, obsessed with big ideas, but more nuanced interactions among people and so on. So that's also nagomi. And as you pointed out, Nick, I'm really amazed by your knowledge of the Japanese language. But as you mentioned, wa is very important. But as you said, it's a kanji character. It's a Chinese character. So Chinese culture has been something like the Latin language in Europe. So we do need it to express some ideas and with really respected classic culture. But when it comes to really indigenous, traditional concepts, what we call Yamato kotoba, these are indigenous Japanese words. Wa is nagomi in these, really original Japanese, really ancient words. And so in that sense, I think wa is of course important, but nagomi would be the more genuine, authentic expression of that. Yeah.
Yeah, this certainly is one of the joys for me in learning Japanese. The language is, even after many years of studying the language, you release a book on a word I never knew existed, and I get this new depth in the language.
I'm pretty sure there would be some Australian words that I don't recognize.
Maybe some vulgar slang expressions.
I know you guys say a sparkling wine is bubbly and flat white coffee.
Yeah.
Actually, flat white is becoming popular in Japan now. I mean, I love to have flat white from time to time. I'm sure there will be some hidden gems of Australian, culture that I'm not aware of. But anyway. Yeah,
I think there are, but maybe we just don't have that deep culture or history. This is probably this is a word for another conversation, but I think the only unique word that we have is mateship. That's quite unique, and that has a history and a depth and a uniqueness. But Japanese culture has so many, and this is what makes learning the language.
But by the way, what is mateship?
I don't want to get into that because that'd be very hard to describe. But it is similar to something like Ikigai or wabi-sabi, that if you ask someone what mateship is, everyone would define it slightly differently. So it's this idea of obviously friendship, helping others, but a casual laid backness to it, maybe acceptance. But it also goes back to our roots with World War I. It ties in all these cultural elements, looking after your fellow man and woman. But yeah, let's move on to.
Just one thing. So it's a gender neutral expression. Like you can say mateship between women.
Yeah. And I mean, we obviously have that term, mate, g'day mate, how are you mate? And that is gender neutral, but that's the only word I thought, what is uniquely Australian, where it's perhaps a cultural concept where it is a bit ambiguous and vague, but truly represent Australia. And I think we only have that one word. We have expressions and slang, but nothing like what Japan has.
So I'm waiting for your book on mateship.
I don't think I'll be writing a book on mateship, but yes, let's move on. So as you pointed out, Ken, and I'm quoting, nagomi is considered to be the mother of important concepts such as wabi-sabi, zen, kintsugi, ichigo, ichie, and ikigai. And as you just explained, you describe it as the pinnacle of all Japanese culture and central to the Japanese philosophy of life. So yeah, this is really fascinating that you have all these wonderful words that describe or articulate these fascinating cultural concepts. And then we have this one word, nagomi, that seems to, I guess, point to them all or include them all.
Yeah.
And in your book, you offer five pillars, like you did with your first book, The Little Book of Ikigai. And I think I'll let the reader discover those. So I'll keep them a secret. I'll share one. I think one that perhaps resonated with me is finding a sense of peace in whatever you are doing. And we'll touch on that as we talk today. What I love about your book is that it's not a shortcut to happiness or success or wealth, and you make that a point. Quoting you again, it is about understanding and enhancing the good and positive aspects of our lives to balance the difficulties that inevitably befall every one of us. It's about maximizing the value of our positive traits, good fortune and success as a way of increasing our well-being and making us more resilient. So along with harmony, resilience also seems to be a strong virtue in Japan. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, as you know, maybe you've experienced it when you were in Japan. We have earthquakes and volcano eruptions and tsunami and typhoons and so. So we unfortunately are living in a place where there are many natural disasters. But there are bonuses too. Like we have many onsen, hot springs, and change of 4 seasons and really wonderful nature and so on. So we are living in a really volatile natural environment, so to speak. So from partly due to that reason, I think the Japanese people have developed a strong sense of resilience, to overcome difficulties and hardships and so on. And I think it's in us, but the key insight here is that it does not come from a male chauvinistic approach to fight with your enemies and so on. I mean, it all actually comes from this idea that you can, establish a nagomi relationship, harmony, even with your adversaries. I mean, even with your enemies. That's a really interesting aspect of Japanese culture. If you come to Japan, and of course you've been here, you would be surprised that many shrines, many Shinto shrines are established in memory of a defeated enemy. I mean, so it's something really human to do. I think, when you are in a battle, of course you fight. The samurai warriors used to fight really, really ferociously. I mean, that's the way of the samurai. But when they defeat enemy out of respect and out of, maybe repentance, not so much repentance, but out of the acknowledgement of the fact that this individual has been a really wonderful guy, you sometimes establish a shrine to commemorate your enemy. And some people say that was because people were afraid that their ghost would come back and haunt you and so on. So there might have been some selfish, practical reasons for that. But in any case, I think it's in the deep roots of Japanese society to respect even your enemies, and arch rivals, and you try to establish a nagomi with your adversary. And I think that is at the core of Japanese concept of resilience. You don't try to overcome something that is, objecting to your goals. I mean, like you don't know what Mother Nature would do at any time. So no matter what preparations we might make, how well we might be equipped to cope with natural disasters, the Japanese philosophy is to, somehow come to terms with, somehow come to be in a harmonious relationships with even your natural disasters and so on. So I think that's at the core of Japanese idea of resilience. And if you know, it's at the core of the relationship between men and women. I mean, there is, contrary to popular belief, Japanese women are quite strong. Maybe you have a first-hand knowledge about that. So it's even a really strong Japanese man would have to find nagomi with his girlfriend or wife and whatever. So this idea of resilience is tightly coupled with the concept of nagomi, harmony. Mm-hmm. It's not defeating your enemy, it's rather to find peace with your enemy if you can, even in difficult situations.
It seems so culturally unique to Japan, these themes of resilience, but also this, as you mentioned, it's not this chauvinistic, aggressive resilience. It's this, it's almost seems passive, but it seems to encapsulate these themes of acceptance. Actually, arugamama comes to mind. This understanding of the true nature of things. There must be harmony, there must be balance, and to recognize an opponent with a shrine seems so unique to Japan. So I didn't know that. So that's why I love these conversations with you, Ken. I get to learn something very special every time we talk. So
it's unique. So
thank you.
I don't know about you, but somebody said a really interesting thing many years ago, and she was from the United States, and she lived in Japan for some time. And what she said was genuinely interesting. And she said when she was in the United States, every morning she woke up, she was under pressure. She felt that she had to do something in the day to make her case in life. So she needed to be aggressive, assertive, and so on. That was the assumption while she was in the United States. And when she moved to Japan for study or for work, I don't recall, but she said, the way she woke up in Japan was totally different. Every morning she woke up, she was really relaxed. And as you said, arugamamani, just let it go and be yourself. And that cultural assumptions were totally different from the United States. That's what she said. So I don't know about you. I mean, are you comparing Japan and Australia? How would you describe this experience? I mean, do you have a similar experience like this American lady or?
I think so. I mean, I think in Australia we're probably a bit more laid back than Americans, but I certainly did find more peace and more realizations of we can take this slow way, or at times I just didn't seem to worry. And there was I think what I learned from Japan and Japanese people was there's no need to talk things up. There's no need to self-promote. There's no need to push and compete. I can just relax and be myself and focus on the external, and also be more in the moment. And I certainly had many challenges in Japan. I had my own English school, and I had lots of other things I was juggling. But I think overall, I do find this tranquility and peace in Japan, and there's far less conflict in relationships that I found. Yeah.
Yeah, what you say is quite interesting because in Tokyo, where I live, we think we have certain element of the Western culture because Tokyo is, after all, one of the hubs of global economy. So we do find these people who are aggressive and assertive, and they try to present his or her case into a newcomer and so on. But if you go to Kyoto, for example, the ancient capital, those people in the power, these priests from the temple and all these, houses of great cultural traditions, tea masters and flower arrangement, ikebana masters, and they keep such a low profile. I mean, they don't have to assert themselves every day. I mean, if you go to a really great restaurant, I mean, the chefs of these restaurants would not boast about how great their cuisine are. I mean, it's just, they just behave in a way just like you just described, in a really naturalistic, subdued, low profile way. That's the Kyoto way. So I think in that sense, Kyoto would be probably more authentically Japanese compared to a more buoyant and more competitive Tokyo. But even in Tokyo, I do feel that the culture is kind of different from the American way of pushing yourself up to the front. So.
Now it reminds me, I guess it reminds me of my father-in-law, and I think I've mentioned to you, he's a potter and he makes shinoyaki, and he's very good at what he does. But if you met him, you just wouldn't know, and he'd never talk up what he does. So I've certainly learned a lot of lessons about just being yourself and doing what you love, and just let your work express yourself rather than your words, or there's no sense of self-promotion, certainly with my father-in-law. And I think he's done quite significant work, and he could certainly,
I mean,
talk about that. Yeah.
And it has practical implications or even existential implications, because as you know, Japan is a country where people's life expectancies are long. I mean, the Japanese are probably the most healthy and longest living nationals on this planet. And I think, well, of course, there are many elements like genetics and food and lifestyle and so on. But the lack of this pressure to, compete with each other and, make your way, I think this harmony that the Japanese lifestyle has, it is probably the key to finding a long and healthy life. And, I think this would be probably one of the most important messages that could come from this kind of conversation, for example. I mean, obviously you are relaxed, but I would like to meet Nick before you went to Japan, where you were male chauvinistic, self-imposing guy, or I don't know. Do you feel you have changed?
Oh, I've certainly changed. I used to be quite ambitious, and I think I used to have the desire to, let's do this and talk things up. I'm going to succeed. And success seemed very important to me. And I think the more I tried to achieve success, the harder I found to find it. And then when I started, for example, doing Ikigai, I just thought, well, this Western view, it's all wrong. Someone should do something about it. And I thought, it's not me, because I'm just not qualified. I know it's not Ikigai. And then a few years later, I thought, well, this is getting out of hand. This Venn diagrams on the World Health Organization website. Okay, I'll do something about it. I'll just start a podcast. And so I had this very relaxed approach to starting Ikigai and Ikigai Tribe. And it sort of organically evolved into, a business and a community. And so I found in this approach, I was far less ambitious and forward thinking. I just thought, well, I care about this concept, so I'll start a podcast, and hopefully I can interview, Japanese researchers and authors. And that was 2 years ago. So here I am talking to you today, and I'm really enjoying the work that I do. So I definitely think the younger version of me would probably would have taken this more aggressive, not aggressive, but more ambitious approach. And I would have been talking about it to everyone. And I just don't do that anymore. Yeah.
I think that's a really great insight because, if you look at what the podcast market is like, I mean, I really love to listen to Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman.
Oh, yeah.
Podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, they are big in the United States. And, what I find in those podcasts, Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman and so on, the people on that, Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman included, they are natural selves. I mean, it's the idea of a podcast. I think nagomi should be at the heart of every successful podcast because they are relaxed and they are not there to promote their products or services and so on. So when, for example, Grimes, Elon Musk's lover, appears on podcast, she's not there to, promote her new album or so. I mean, she's just being herself, and that's what people would love to listen to. So I think that's very nagomi. I mean, it's quite different from TED. I go to TED from time to time, and I've been there since 2011, I think. And TED is really doing a great job. I think what they're doing is really what ideas worth spreading. But having said that, I do feel that there's a change in the zeitgeist, and which is, there are more podcasts than TED type presentations. And the key is, again, to how you can relax and be yourself and let yourself go and let it flow, and all in this wonderful universe of nagomi and so on. So that's my perception of what the world is heading for.
Yeah, I think it's this authenticity. People are quite happy to listen or watch a podcast for 2.5 hours if it's authentic and a real conversation. If you said that to someone in the 80s, like the future of entertainment or the future of media will be watching other people have 1, 2 hour, 3 hour conversations, they'd just go, you're crazy. But I really think people want meaningful conversations. They want to witness meaningful conversations. They want to know the real person. And then we begin to understand, wow, everyone's similar. We all have different lives and we do different things, but we're vulnerable. We're all seeking nagomi, I think. And so let's move on to these subjects, because you did you mentioned food, you mentioned health. So in your book, you touch on nagomi in the context of food, the self, relationships, health, lifelong learning, creativity, life, society, and nature. So let's have a look at a few of these themes, Ken. One thing I found, again, a new word you've introduced me to, and it's this word, konai, chomi.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, wow, I didn't know this word. So would you like to explain what that word is?
This is quite a fascinating word. Every, Japanese kid would know from their experience, because in Japan, rice is the staple food. And, so I'm sure I mean, there are many food items, okazu, accompaniments on the table. But whatever it is, it is designed in such a way that it would go terribly well with the rice. So, this idea of, taking turns to eat some food items, it might be roasted fish or some pickles or, yaki, tamago yaki, roasted egg, whatever, vegetables and so on. You take turns, you put one of these in your mouth, and you put some rice in your mouth too. But then you can, additionally, you can put some extra materials in your mouth, so there are, so consider there's this case, there are 5 items, A, B, C, D, E, and rice. Then you can go, okay, item B, item C in the mouth together, and rice, and then item E, again as well. And you munch, oh, this is good. And you can put item B again, C. And so this idea of cooking, mixing things up in your mouth is called konai chomi. And it's, konai literally means in the mouth. Chomi means, making the taste. And so this is something that every Japanese kid is familiar with. And so
yeah, this
This
actually reminded me of a memory I had way back in 95. So back in 1995, I actually went to Tokyo as a trainee chef, and I worked at this chain called Kushikyu, and it was Kushiyaki. Chain's no longer, but they were part of Shoya. So I think Shoya is still a big.
It's a huge
chain. Yeah. And I remember this chef eating on a break, and he would put in, he might be eating nasu, like eggplants or some chicken or something. And still, while he had food in his mouth, he was adding rice. And I thought I thought it was actually like a bad way of eating, because I thought, why is this guy adding food to his mouth when it's already full? And I had this memory when I read that and thought, wow, that's what he was doing. He was doing this konai chomi. Yeah.
I think in the Western culture, it's typical to put just one food item at one time in the mouth. But, the beauty of rice is that it's so nagomi. I mean, rice, as you know, is quite neutral. And it can accept many, many food items. Like this famous sushi format. I mean, you can put any kind of fish on the rice. And actually, if you go to a rotating sushi restaurant nowadays in Tokyo, I mean, you should really come back to Japan to see all these wonderful innovations of rotating sushi, rotating belt. And
kaiten sushi.
Really huge innovation. They are literally tens of, maybe hundreds of different food items on rice. So rice is a medium through which you can put many, many different food items. And so, even twice or three times the amount at one time. So of course, it's not such a great manner to put too many food items like your, senpai was doing in the restaurant, but it is certainly possible. It is actually a great idea to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try that. So next time I'm eating Japanese, I'll try to remember to mix the rice and other kazu and see if I can have this cooking in the mouth as you describe it. Konai chomi. So let's move on to relationships, Ken. The nagomi of relationships. And I'm going to quote you here. You write, in order to achieve nagomi in relationships, it is important to be emotionally balanced. And in this regard, Japanese people have a unique set of life hacks. What are some of these life hacks?
Now, this would depend on person to person. So I cannot be too general about that. But I do think, for example, not contradicting somebody. I mean, even when he or she is telling an obvious lie, you don't say you are a liar or I mean, just smile enigmatically, like in Japanese way, and you just let it go. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I think one of the most useful ideas that probably would help Western people to understand Japanese psyche is this distinction between honne and tatemae. Honne is the true heart of yourself, and tatemae is something that you would say to keep social appearances. And the Japanese are really good at, making use of honne, tatemae. So as you know, if we are great friends, and if we go to izakaya, for example, together, we would be speaking from our true heart, right? I mean, honne. But when you are with somebody whom you are not very familiar with, or some important people, then you wouldn't actually let out your honne, true heart. You would use social preferences, and this, would be present in any society. But I would say that it's fair to say that in Japan, this art of communication has developed to such sophistication that any Japanese can, use this. And maybe as an expatriate, maybe you have had some experiences where you can't actually tell what this person's honne, true heart is until you really get to know that person well.
Yeah, I've witnessed a friend switch. I've been with a friend. We've been having fun, casually talking, and we were rounding a corner, and then he saw a customer, and he switched into this tatemae mode, and he's bowing and adomo, and he was saying all these things and being very polite.
Yeah.
And then a few minutes later, I actually asked him, said, "Wow, you just changed into a different person." And I said, "Is that hard to do?" And he's like, "Oh, it's just normal." But I really noticed that one day, and it sort of made me think, wow, Japanese, they have all these social cues where they kind of really have to adapt and adjust their behavior because of these relationships. And I later discovered it was, honne tatemae. So it's quite useful, I think.
It is useful. And, the real pleasure of getting to know somebody is when you start talking with honne, true heart. And that's when you can tell that you have really become a great friend with this person. So my book is also out in Germany. I think, for some reasons, though, I know that my previous book, Ikigai and Nagomi, they are really quite popular in Germany. And, I had this, it's in here. I had this really great colleague of mine, Anna, visit me in Tokyo restaurant, and it was Friday, and there were many company employees, salarymen, talking in honne, true heart. And Anna was totally surprised because she said in Germany, people don't do that. I mean, because people you work with in a company is your rivals and you compete with these people. That's what she said in Germany. So you never show your weakness or vulnerabilities to these people. So that was kind of amazing. That is a huge difference between Japanese and German culture. And I wonder where Australia stands. Do you sometimes go to a pub and let out your oohs and weaknesses? And
oh yeah, we'd we'd definitely. I think we'd all let it all go. Maybe we'd have a tendency we'd probably have a tendency just to go out with the people we consider our friends.
Not your random colleague or.
With our random colleagues, but we'd certainly, I think would be honne, would be our true selves. It might also depend on, on the person. But yeah, I mean, Japanese, it's really interesting. Japanese do have that ability. Once they're outside the workplace, they can, they can relax and they can sort of almost talk freely to their managers or their senpai or, their boss. In Australia, we certainly have a far more relaxed workplace. So maybe that need to let go isn't as strong. But I was surprised when I read that about your German friend Anna, and that she was shocked. Like you'd be willing to show your true self amongst your coworkers outside of work, and that it was almost like a weakness or So that was unusual. But on this theme, Ken, you write that you shouldn't try to change the people around you. You should let them be and instead focus on becoming your unique individual self. And I guess that unique individual self leans to honne, your true self. Yeah. And you also write a person can often shine more when flanked by people. And this is why we call our partners our better half. But in your book, you introduced this beautiful cultural concept of shake.
Oh, yeah.
To represent this idea. And I was fascinated when I read this, because again, this was another cultural practice I didn't know. So what is shake?
Yeah, when we build our garden, sometimes we use the natural background as part of the gardening principle, and it's called shake. So I don't know if this is working. So if you have a house like this, I don't know. This is the garden. This is a Japanese garden.
Yep.
And the trees and so on, and pond and so on. So this is what the designer designed.
Yep.
But on top of that, you might have a mountain in the background like this, and there might be some, I don't know, structures previously, constructed. So, these external motifs are always, used to make a beautiful Japanese garden. The most famous example would be one in Kagoshima Prefecture. I mean, it's called Isoten. There's this huge volcano there called Sakurajima. It's an active volcano. If you go to this garden, you can see that they have used the Sakurajima volcano as part of the landscapes. So that is the philosophy of shake. So you see it everywhere. In Katsurarikyu Royal Gardens in Kyoto, you also see shake. So it is an idea that you don't treat the environment as something that is external to your creation. You actually design your creation in nagomi with the environment, and that I think is a really wonderful concept. My really great friend architect Ken Mogi, he designed the new national stadium that was used in the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. And Ken Mogi always says this is the most important concept in his architecture, makeru, defeat. He always talks about defeated architecture, by which he means that, it's defeated by the environment. I mean, it's, in modern times, architects tend to impose his or her own ideas on the building, right? So that he or she can express the self. But Ken Mogi, who designed the new national stadium, always says about being defeated by the environment. And I think this is wonderful. And I'm really proud of the new stadium. I'm afraid you should definitely visit, because there are trees growing from the stadium already. That was his idea. Oh, wow. So it is being defeated by the plants. And it looks like one of these Studio Ghibli animations by Hayao Miyazaki. I mean, it's the whole stadium being defeated by plants. And so
it almost seems to take on Shintoism, this understanding that the natural world is something we can't control. We should embrace it and let it influence us.
Exactly.
So it's astounding. The Japanese people have this beautiful and very creative way of expressing themselves through architecture or gardening, this shake. So that's amazing. I think I'll try and find a stock photo of an example of shake, and I'll put it on the podcast notes to articulate how you include the natural landscape and find this nagomi, I guess, this balance between the garden you're creating or designing and the natural world around you. And speaking of the natural world, let's move on to bathing. And this is something you actually relate to, the nagomi of health. And it's, nagomi is the heart of health of the Japanese people. And it's this idea of being one with what you are doing as an essential element. And this actually reminds me of your pillar from the little book of Ikigai, that being in the here and now.
Yeah.
And you write on so many themes, but do you think being in the here and now is a precursor to the flow state?
I do believe it. And, maybe you know, but this concept yoku is very important. It's really fun to write Chinese characters like this. I mean, it's it's fun. So so yoku is like shinrin yoku, forest bathing, or kaisui yoku, ocean bathing, and or even gekko yoku, moonlight bathing. I mean, yeah, sometimes people bathe in moonshine and moonlight, and this is wonderful. So this idea of yoku is very much in Japanese culture. I think this idea of immersing yourself in some atmosphere, whether it's forest or hot spring or moonlight or whatever. I mean, so I think this is the core of that in Japanese concept of nagomi when it comes to the relationship between you and the environment, how to immerse yourself. And I think the Japanese are rather good at designing spaces where you can immerse yourself in something like hot spring. Do you like hot springs?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was very aware of Shinrin yoku, so forest bathing, and then onsen yoku. But yeah, as you write in your book, you also mentioned kaisui yoku, so ocean bathing, nikko yoku, sunbeam bathing, and then getsuko yoku, moonlight bathing. And yeah, I didn't realize, wow, all these other yoku, these other bathing exist in Japan. And so it seems to be touching on, again, being in the here and now, but also the appreciation of sensory pleasure, which you write about in your other book. So yeah, I've done forest bathing. I love onsen. I certainly love going outside and feeling sunlight, but I had no idea about the moonlight bathing. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this idea, I think probably the onsen hot spring is probably the apotheosis of this yoku idea. I mean, this whole idea that you don't go to bath just to get clean. I think it's, at ancient times, actually, people used to stay at onsen for weeks and even for months to cure. And so this idea of staying at a place and immerse yourself in an environment has been central to Japanese culture, and it's still here. And so, whenever I go to the United States or whatever, and when there's just a shower or this really shallow bathtub, it's this probably I should have written that in my book. It's quite different, isn't it? As you know, the Western bathtub is quite shallow, so you can't really immerse yourself. But the Japanese bathtub is quite deep, as you know. So you can. Have you been to a Japanese household and put yourself in a Japanese style bathtub?
Yeah, for sure.
So this idea is to immerse yourself in the hot water longer time, and people even read books and listen to radio, and even especially ladies and Japanese ladies tend to take a bath for an hour or so. And
we do have that to some degree, not to the same degree of what Japanese do, but I mean, I remember when I had students and I'd have to warn them and say, look, when you go to Australia or the UK, they'll have only showers, and you've also got to understand that water can be quite expensive. And so in Australia or the UK, it's just to clean yourself. So you shouldn't, don't have long baths or long showers with your host family because, it might be expensive. And we only perceive it really as something to clean ourselves. And maybe once a week, someone might have a long hot bath to relax. But yeah, it's very different, the bathing culture. And I love going to Japan, and I have a good friend who has a really deep bath, and I sort of think, oh, awesome. I'm going to have a nice long hot bath and just relax. So
and maybe some beer afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I think that'd be a really wonderful thing. Yeah.
So on this theme of learn so much from you, Ken. You touch on lifelong learning. And as a child, Ken, you often heard the adage from your parents and other grown-ups that the brain is the only abundant resource in Japan.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you like to speak on this?
Yeah, that's, I have actually the globe here. Australia is there. You are there, and I'm here. It's a small island nation.
Yeah.
So there are no natural resources compared to Australia. I mean, you're here. And so I think this is the obsession of the Japanese society to make a really great use of this organ that you have. I mean, this is the only natural resources that we have. So there's this idea that, Japanese kids, of course, are expected to do well at school. Sometimes it goes too far, but it's in the culture. So I think there's this idea that what you have between your ears is the most important asset in your life, and for that country as well. I think it's very much in Japanese psyche, and it's also true today, I think. And
so this highlights something you've coined, I think, nagami do. So do is the way or the path, this idea that you can constantly learn and there's no focus on a final outcome or achieving a goal. Yeah. And I think our listeners would be very aware of judo, kendo, maybe sado, so the art of, or the way of tea, kado. So yeah, the way of nagomi, you've coined it in your book as nagami-do, which isn't a word, I guess, Japanese use, but it could be. How important do you think it is that we have this curiosity and this desire to continually learn?
Yeah, I mean, so this is nagomi-do. Actually, I coined this. I think because when I Googled for this word, when I finished writing the book, there were no matches except mine. So I think this is a new word. But anyway, I think it's very important. And, like judo. Judo is actually when you try to establish a dynamic nagomi with your opponent. I think it's not, in judo, you have a saying, juyoku go seisu, which literally means if you are flexible, you can defeat a strong person. That is the whole idea of judo. Mm-hmm. Ju literally meaning being flexible, balanced and in peace and so on. So there's this idea that even when you are facing your opponent, you really need to establish nagomi. And so the same applies to learning too. I mean, in Japan, we have this concept of forever young, tokowaka. And in order to stay forever young, you really need to keep learning all your life. And that is also really great to ameliorate and prevent dementia, Alzheimer's disease and so on, which is really probably the most single important issue related to the brain health today. I mean, so I think it is very important to keep going, learning, finding a nagomi with your new self, because, this is something quite profound, I think, and something that I probably didn't articulate so much as I hoped in my book, and which is, when you learn something, for example, when you went to Japan, you do experience many things, but in that process, you try to establish a nagomi with your new self. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, you become a new self through learning. That's what happened when I went to the UK. I really love to, learn the British sense of humor. I know Boris Johnson is having trouble in
at the moment,
London, but even in these cases, when you listen to people's conversations, there's a touch of humor, in what the British people say. And of course, Australia is very much culturally related to Britain. So I'm sure there would be Australian equivalent of British humor or Australian humor.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Crocodile Dundee comes to mind. Anyway, so I mean, so when I went to the UK, I really, found new nagomi with my new self. So in that sense, you become forever young because you are constantly changing, and
this makes sense. I've actually had a conversation on this, that every time you read something or learn something, you become different. You are a new person, or you change. So it's fascinating. And it reminded me actually of this aspect in your book, in now sort of moving on to creativity, which I think we can strongly relate to learning. You learn something, and I think it gives you this new ability to express yourself and be creative. And you highlight that the key to nagomi creativity is acceptance of youth and immaturity as a positive value. And I think this might surprise some listeners, because I think when people think about Japanese, they perceive Japanese as being very ingenious and creative, but perhaps in a more serious, diligent light, for example, shokunin. So this idea of youth and immaturity as a positive value is really interesting. So would you like to give a few examples of that?
Just look at how Japanese anime and manga fascinating people. I mean, Nintendo is a Japanese company, and it produced Super Mario, and this. And of course, Pokemon is a Japanese phenomenon, and all these wonderful creative works have come from the fact that these really serious people, serious grown-ups, are playing with being childish, or being curious about the world. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of Japanese culture. And so I think I think it was Pablo Picasso who said that he wanted to paint like a 5-year-old, even after achieving mastery as world's most famous painter. So I think it's probably something that is culture independent. I'm sure there will be an Australian equivalent to that. But for example, Hayao Miyazaki, he's a deeply childish person, I think. When I say childish, I'm not saying that in a accusing manner. I mean, he's wonderfully childish, Hayao Miyazaki. Otherwise, he can't keep creating anime like My Neighbor Totoro. I mean, Spirited Away, all his works are really wonderful. And he doesn't forget what it felt like when he was a kid. I mean, his inner child is very much alive. And I think he's still a 5-year-old at heart.
Yeah.
Do you have a 5-year-old in you, Nick?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really love this idea of embracing your inner child. And I mean, I'm often like a 5-year-old when I learn a new word, and I'll almost run to my wife and go, wow, I've learned batakusai, like I didn't know. And I'll have this desire to tell her, like, I've learned a new word, almost like a child, or this idea to create something and share it with others. It's something we did as children. We wanted to share our creativity. I think it's a beautiful thing to embrace this inner child. And it's something that should be promoted. And often it's not. It's like, well, we need to get serious. We need to work. We need to solve all these problems. It's often our creativity and our childlike nature that solves problems perhaps in a nagomi way, in a far more harmonious, inclusive way. And so this kind of brings us to something you write about in your book. And I love this expression, which I didn't know about again, batakusai. And you write that Japan has incorporated many different cultures within its society without losing its distinct identity. And you have this saying, batakusai, and it literally translates to something that smells of butter. And it means something Western that has too much influence or threatens to overbalance the way of nagomi. And this actually reminded me of the Venn diagram of Ikigai.
Uh-huh.
And I know in your book, in this book actually, in the way of nagomi, you actually address the Western Venn diagram. And I think all my readers know that it's not an accurate representation. But what were your first thoughts when you saw the Venn diagram?
Well, I thought it was really alien. I mean, it was something that was not rooted in Japanese culture, as far as I know. And but I think it's useful to make the concept Ikigai, accessible for many people. So I think the Venn diagram, I think did a lot of service rather than disservice. But it can be a misinformation or disinformation in some cases if you are not careful. So, it's quite interesting. I mean, it's probably the fault of the Japanese in some sense because I'm really an exception, and I write about Ikigai and nagomi in English, but the Japanese tend to be shy, and so they don't broadcast their concepts as much as they would be well advised to, as you know. So maybe Nick, you should help the Japanese people, express their ideas. I'm fine. I'm outspoken. I'm an extrovert. But what you could do probably in the future would be to, for example, your good father-in-law would have many insights and pieces of philosophy that are really valuable for people outside Japan. So maybe you can help spread the good words. I mean, because I do believe that there are things that people can learn a lot from this wonderful artisan, for example. Your father.
Actually, I write a lot about my father-in-law in my book. So as you know, I'm running a book on Ikigai Khan. And I do share many stories about my father-in-law. So that's my intention. And I guess I'd love to go back to Japan and just interview everyday Japanese about Ikigai. And I know for many Japanese, it's something they might not really think about. And then for other Japanese, they can easily identify Ikigai, and maybe tragically for many Japanese, they don't feel it anymore. There's all these unique social problems in Japan, like hikikomori or kodokushi. And so I feel in a way that for many Japanese, they've lost their connection to some of the cultural concepts we've discussed. And that's probably a podcast discussion we could have maybe on another day. But let's focus on your book, Ken, because we're sort of also here to promote it. I think we'll end with this idea of nagomi of nature. And I know nature's really important to you, and you go running in your local forest, I think almost every day. And you often make these short videos sharing your reflections and thoughts. In your book, you offer a few examples of man and nature working harmoniously together. And one is Satoyama. So what's Satoyama?
It's really an interesting idea. It's where people, the activities of people resonate with the activities of nature. And I just write down the kanji character for that, Satoyama. So Sato literally means people's village and dwellings and so on. Yama literally means mountain. So Satoyama is this idea that there's this interface between people's activities, cultures and civilizations with the greater nature. And, it's everywhere. If you go to any local place in Japan, probably your father-in-law lives in such an area, you would see that over the long years, people's activities and nature's ecosystem have merged into a really rich, diverse environment. And so, one argument is that there are more biodiversity in the Satoyama environment rather than just pure nature or bright lights, big city itself. Actually, there are many endangered species in Japan, which can live only in the Satoyama environment. I mean, a typical example would be where people cultivate the land, and there would be grasslands, and there would be crops mingled in really interesting seasonal changes, and there are butterfly species, there are insect species that can be found only in such a Satoyama environment, which tells us that this has been going on for many, many years, maybe hundreds of years or maybe thousands of years. Otherwise, these endangered species wouldn't have found their habitat in these things. So this is a really important, concept of for the environment in the future, because, in the Western way, I do feel that sometimes that when people say we should preserve nature, it is often meant that we should really, do nothing about nature. I mean, we should
almost avoid it. Yeah, like
avoid it.
Leave it on its own.
Yeah. But the Japanese approach to nature is actually we should cultivate a natural environment in such a way that there would be a harmonious relationship. There would be a nagomi between human activities and natural ecosystem. So that's the key idea about the tema.
That was fascinating to read, that insight, and that I think you mentioned there a certain type of butterfly that can only exist in Satoyama.
Yeah, that's right.
That was like, wow, I had no idea that when nature and man connect harmoniously, they end up creating something new, a new species. Yeah. And you were an amateur entomologist when you were a child, Ken. Yeah, and you used to love butterflies when you were a child. Yeah. So was that a source of Ikigai for you, to chase butterflies and identify them?
I actually chase butterflies. I don't catch them anymore, but I do chase them when I'm running. So probably people would have recognized me as some strange man.
That's your inner child.
Chasing butterflies, and that's my lot. But so when I go to Australia, I went to Brisbane for a conference. I was watching butterflies too, but in Australia, I would be probably chasing all these wonderful parrots, and they are really wonderful parrots. Parrots is.
Yeah, we have quite a few unique birds. Yeah.
Maybe you have accustomed too much, but I also learned that there are wild koala bears and roaming around Australian forest. So I love to see a wild koala bear. I know I'm not supposed to touch them or anything, but it'll be really great to experience.
Yeah, well, happy to have you and show you. There's one holiday we went to, actually quite some years ago. There was a very small island that had almost like a nagomi with koalas, and they had wild koalas within all these gum trees within this residential area, and you could just walk around, and almost every tree would have a koala. And
really,
there was this very respectful relationship where the locals would, be very adamant about saying, when you come and visit, don't feed them, just maintain a distance. And there seemed to be this nagomi between humans and koalas. So
that would be my next destination.
All right, well, I'll take you. Thank you, Ken, for joining. Unfortunately, I've got to go soon, but I know you're also a very busy person, and thank you. This is the third time you've been on my podcast, so thank you.
Make this a regular thing. I mean, I really enjoy talking to you, and let's do it again and so on. And I'm sure you will, calligraphy collection would probably
Increase, yeah.
increase or whatever,
Mm.
deepen or whatever. But as you know, the Japanese tea ceremony. I mean, there's this idea of seasons, and you actually change the scroll from time to time, and a real tea master would have hundreds of scrolls to commemorate each occasion, like the passing of the spring and coming of the summer. But not only that, some anniversary, like as some anniversary of important meeting or
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I'd love to collect more. Or commission some artists to make them.
Maybe you can draw one of your own. Like,
maybe, but thank you, Ken. It's always a joy, and I look forward to our next conversation. So I'll touch base with you soon.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. So have a nice day. Thank you.
Bye.